I will delve into the news headlines now. It's important to know what's happening in the news, right? So I'll start off with the Daily Graphic Weekend Special. Health Ministry, FDA destroys seized opioids, right? This is the big story on the front page of the Daily Graphic Weekend Special. The story comes with a photograph of the Health Minister, Kwabena Minta Akando, who is Minister of Health, and Dr. Delise Mimidakun, CEO of the Food and Drugs Authority, supervising the loading of the drugs into the furnace for destruction. Interesting stuff happening there. So, Health Ministry, FDA destroys seized opioids. Story by Benjamin Glover, reporting there. Also on the front page of the Daily Graphic Weekend Special, despite elimination of U.S. aid contracts, U.S. commits to life-saving programs in Ghana. U.S. Ambassador to Ghana, Virginia Palmer, assures. Moving on to the back page, tragic death sparks demand for tougher health checks. And this is in relation to the death of a Nigerian boxer, Abukum, during a bout between a Ghanaian boxer and the deceased Nigerian boxer who goes by the name Gabriel Oluwasegun Olariwaju. May his soul rest in perfect peace. And his death really has sparked lots of conversations around safety for boxers, going through the right protocols for a boxing match, and of course, checks for health, right? Health checks for some of these athletes as and when they have to participate in some of these competitions. So hopefully we are able to make the necessary reforms to make the sport much safer endeavor to engage in. So these are the big stories on the Daily Graphic Weekend Special. Moving on to the Mirror, it has an interesting profiling of Madam Joanna Bunte, and that story can be found on page 10. It talks about secrets to a youthful 90. Wow. And I want to believe she's 90, but she doesn't look like, she doesn't look her age at all. You can see it on your screen there. She shares her secrets to a youthful 90. And if you want a lot more insights into her story, really, you can get it on the Mirror or in the Mirror newspaper. Does law permit maltreatment of house helps? All of that and more on page 12 of the Mirror newspaper. They call themselves Ghana's most popular weekend paper. Finally, here on the Mirror, fire destroys 8 shops at Tema Community 1 market. Story on page 3 of the Mirror newspaper. And with the newspapers, I finally end with the Spectator. Cut in U.S. aid funding, uncertainty, fear grip health workers, patients in northern region. Wow. So we know that the new U.S. government led by President Donald Trump, cut federal government support or grants or their work they do with the United States Agency for International Development. They cite what he describes as waste and abuse, right, in the activities of U.S. aid, and for that reason felt that they need to realign things through a Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and that has led to really devastating effects in other parts of the world, not only in Ghana, but also seeing the effects of it in Ghana. And the Spectator is reporting that uncertainty and fear grip health workers and patients all the way in Myanmar. It's even probably worse, right, after their serious earthquake that took 2,700 lives, in that country. You knew that there was also a lot of U.S. aid support, and now they have to fend for themselves. So all across the world where this support was really, helping a lot of people, it's bringing to the fore again concerns around how they are able to be self-sustaining as a country, whoever the country is. And also here in Ghana, we are hearing the uncertainty, and fear grip health workers and patients in Northern Region. I'll bring you excerpts of that story later on. But let's move online and see what the citynewsroom.com and other online portals have been reporting. Now, moving on to a rather tragic story on the citynewsroom.com. In the Ashanti region, 2 students have been shot by a classmate at the Adventist SHS. Wow, rather tragic and very unfortunate. I'll bring you. So these 2 students, I understand, have been seriously injured, right, after shooting incident. I'll bring you details of this particular story, rather tragic one. Moving on to some more stories. Majority leadership committed to growth of new MPs, and that's coming in from Ketu North MP, first-timer Edem Agbana. Also here, government releases new list of DCE nominees. Mahama appoints Dr. Alasan Idrisu as acting government statistician. You know, yesterday I was at an event by Shrash and the Statistical Service, and I was seeing, you know, Prof. Any going about his work as though it was no one's business. And by close of the, you know, a replacement for him had been announced. It's interesting how government works. So Dr. Al-Hassan Idrisu is the new government statistician. Moving on, Intim Fodjo will be arrested if he ignores NIB invitation. Felix Kwachio Fosu is Minister for Government Communication, speaking there. Also here, Mita Akando vows tighter pot checks after 20 million opioid disposal. Story also on citynewsroom.com. Arocha Ghana Lords Police reshuffle urges tougher action on Galamsey. Also here, Supreme Court sets April 9 for case against the Chief Justice removal process. Mahama to host Czech President Pete Pavel on historic state visit. Missing containers pullbacks Energy Minister's plan to reform ECG. Also here, U.S. Ambassador urges Ghana to pay arrears owed to American companies. To some other stories, a rather sad one as well. KNUST student allegedly murdered by boyfriend to be laid to rest on April 5. Right, so the young student in the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, she goes by the name Joanna Deladem Aku Yabani, who was allegedly, you know, murdered by her boyfriend on campus, is to be laid to rest on April 5th. May her soul rest in peace. Bantama residents applaud City FM and Channel One TV for swift water intervention. And Bantama residents showing their gratitude to staff and management of City FM and Channel One TV. And talking about management of City FM and Channel One TV, they paid a courtesy call on GB Foods yesterday. And the story comes along with a photograph of the management of City FM and Channel One TV, led by the managing director, Samuel Atamensa, General Manager Bernard Avler, the head of news, head of business development, head of TV sales, all present when they paid the courtesy call on GB Foods, who've been so supportive to City FM and Channel One TV in the first quarter. Mind you, they were active, you know, partners during our Heritage Month series. So let me say, all through the first quarter, right here at Channel One TV, they were not spectators. They were major players, you know. And shout outs really to the team at GB Food. So it's a good time to delve into the stories. I'd want to start off with the cut in US aid funding. The cut in US aid funding, you know. And this story, a lot of people I know have interest in it because in one way or the other, they either work or have projects ongoing being supported by the United States Agency for International Development, or they know somebody who is involved in it, right? And like we were saying, they do enormous here in Ghana, they do enormous work in our health sector, in WASH initiatives. When I say WASH, water, sanitation, health, hygiene initiatives, right? So in go to remote parts of the country, you'd see US aid support programs helping members get clean access to water, get the right vaccines for children, measles vaccines and all of that, right? And they do so much work in Ghana. So it was really, really worrying when the president for the US, Donald Trump, announced that they were going to cut funding to 90 days. It was an initial pause, and now we are hearing it's even going to be on for much longer. Uncertainty, fear grip health workers, patients in Northern region. Story by Geoffrey Buta, who is in Karaga in the Northern region. And so the story goes on to say, except of its read, in the remote village of Karaga, a midwife at the local health center is running out of options. The center, which serves hundreds of women and children, has been severely affected by the recent suspension of the US aid funding. Without essential medical supplies, Fati and her colleagues are compelled to take difficult, sometimes heartbreaking decisions. Just last week, we had to send a pregnant woman to another facility miles away because we didn't have the right drugs to stabilize her condition, she says, with frustration in her voice. We don't know how long we can keep on going like this. Wow, she added. Fati's story is one of the many unfolding across northern Ghana, where U.S. aid-funded programs provide crucial support for maternal health, malaria treatment, family planning, and HIV/AIDS care. The sudden funding halt announced last week has sparked widespread fear and uncertainty among health workers and residents who now face the grim reality of a potential healthcare crisis. Mohammed Karim, an HIV patient and a father of 5, worries about his life and that of his children. He goes on to say, I'm afraid in some few days to come, my health would deteriorate because without medicine, what are we supposed to do? We rely on the clinic, but now even the nurses are helpless. He laments, our lives have been miserable if no intervention is made. What are we going to do with all the stigma around us? She asks in a chilly voice. Health officials have warned that if no immediate action was taken, the suspension could lead to a surge in preventable deaths. A health worker named without describes the situation as dire. And she goes on to say, many of our facilities are dependent on USAID supported supplies. Without them, we'll see an increase in maternal and infant mortality, more malaria cases, and disruptions in HIV/AIDS treatment. The health worker explained. Wow. And as if the cut in USAID was not enough, President Trump, in his usual characteristic self, very hard, trying to give the hard, man figure, just a few days ago also announced, tariffs on some 180 countries, I believe, where the U.S. trades or have bilateral trades with. And guess what? Ghana is among some of those countries that these tariffs have been slapped on, right? So for Ghana, we have a 10% tariff, and we read in the news that the Foreign Affairs Minister, Samuel Okudzeto-Ablakwa, has called really on the U.S. ambassador to Ghana, Virginia Palmer, to come to the office on Monday to explain, the circumstances around these tariffs and, just to give government some clarifications around how this is going to work. Yesterday, a lot of people have been speaking on it and how this is also going to affect, bilateral trades between Ghana and the U.S. Some other economists also have described this as, so what happened really was that a Trump appointee, I think the U.S. Secretary for Treasury, was speaking to the media or local media in the U.S. and said that this move by President Trump seeks to bring to the U.S. economy in excess of $600 billion, right? And some have said that that doesn't follow the science, it doesn't follow economics, it's closer to voodoo than it is to economics. And of course, people are talking. Trump believes that this is what is needed to help the U.S. economy at this point in time, forms part of his whole Make America Great initiative again. So we'll see how this plays out, especially for, smaller economies like ours, right? We know we trade a lot, or we export quite a number of materials to the U.S., and how all of this is going to affect our bilateral trade with the U.S. So in the coming days and week, we'll see a lot more, but really, really unfortunate, really, really sad stories you are hearing around the cut in U.S. aid and how it's affecting healthcare workers, affecting ordinary people, right, in remote parts of the country. The president in the budget directed the finance minister to look for alternative funding sources for all USAID supported programs. Hopefully, we are able to get through with that and make some other, or find some other lasting solutions to the cuts in these grants that we are been benefiting from the US over the years. But let me take you to the citynewsroom.com, right? Ashanti region, rather tragic. And it was only yesterday when we were discussing how students in some parts or in secondary schools in some parts of the country, have now resorted to violence, for want of a better word, right? Or we're hearing increasing cases or the rise in cases of students, vandalism, violent acts. I remember personally, I was at a Christian Methodist school here in Accra, where students, were fighting among themselves, led into a very bloody scuffle, the police having to come in, students holding all kinds of, and you're wondering, this is not the kind of education really we want for our children in our schools. And the question really was, what is happening at all in our schools? And to think that we were beginning to hear an improved situation, we are now hit with this rather tragic one in the Ashanti region, where 2 students have been shot by classmates at the Adventist SHS. Story by Bright Yeboah. An excerpt of it reads, 2 students at the Seventh-day Adventist school in Bantama in the Ashanti region have been seriously injured in a shooting incident on campus on Friday, April 4, 2025. According to reliable sources within the school, the incident occurred during break time when Bernard Amwabain, a Form 2 student, brought a gun to school. An argument reportedly ensued among the students over whether the weapon was functional. In an attempt to prove it was, Amwabain allegedly fired the gun accidentally, shooting and injuring 2 students. Pinaman, I believe one of the injured, sustained a critical gunshot wound to her forehead, and she was initially rushed to the Kwaraso Hospital, but was later referred to the Komfo-Anokye Teaching Hospital due to the severity of her condition. The Suame police have arrested Amwabain and initiated a full investigation into the incident. I know you have a lot more questions, than answers to this particular story. Rather unfortunate, rather tragic, and again, it raises so many concerns and questions really about the state of security in our senior high schools, right? And would leave law enforcement to conclude on their investigations, and hopefully we are able to rely on that to bring some reforms to how some of these things are done in our schools. But the point is that if you follow the news in the past couple of days, it's not been pleasant at all happenings in our senior high schools, right? And it's important that government, through the Ministry of Education, some have called for, the reform really with regards to the counseling centers in our senior high schools. And these are very important conversations that ought to be had. So I'm sure the Education Minister is following this keenly. There's also, in this particular story, a small weapons and arms problem, right? So the Small Weapons and Arms Commission, the Interior Minister, some people have complained that it looks as though it's too common, right? We are seeing so many of these small arms proliferation in our communities, and this ought to be checked. So hopefully government takes this very seriously. Thankfully no life has been lost yet, but it could have gone completely sour, right? If this is not bad enough. Thankfully it didn't get to the worst possible case. But we need this checked. We need officials to pay critical attention to what's happening in our senior high schools. And I'm sure in the coming days we'll hear from the relevant authorities on this particular matter. Moving from the story, still on the citynewsroom.com, and I want to bring you the opioid story, right? Unim Red, it's a campaign the Ministry of Youth Development, through its agencies, for example, the National Youth Authority, have been running for some time now, and it is aimed at supporting, the youth to stand against the use really and the consumption of some of these opioids and other strong drugs, usually without prescription, that are taken for whatever reason, including recreation. And now I'm beginning to learn that for some, there are even sex enhancements, right? And it's causing quite an unpleasant situation for many of these youth who indulge in these drugs. And I think the story is on the Daily Graphic weekend special, right, where the Ministry of Health and the FDA have destroyed so many of these drugs that were seized at the ports, I believe. And wow, let me just bring excerpts of the story. So Health Ministry, FDA destroyed seized opioids, right? So the story comes along with a photograph of the Health Minister and the FDA CEO, Mimi, Dr. Delise Mimi Darkom. Excerpt of the story reads, the Ministry of Health and the Food and Drugs Authority, FDA, have destroyed a large consignment of opioids intercepted at the Tema port last month. A total of 230 cartons of opioids were destroyed in yesterday's exercise, which was undertaken at a private incinerator at Katamanso near Ashama. Katamanso near Ashama in the Greater Accra region. They included 128 cartons of Traffadol, 92 cartons of tea-making tapentadol, and 10 cartons of Rahul tapentadol. The destruction was witnessed by the Registrar of the High Court, personnel of the FDA, the Narcotics Control Commission, as well as the Ministry of Environment, Science and Technology, based on the orders of the Accra High Court. Also present at the destruction was the Minister of Health, Kwabena Minta Akando, and the Chief Executive Officer of the FDA, Dr. Delise Mimi Dakon. The story gives a background to this particular story. The consignment of undeclared opioid pharmaceuticals worth 20 million Ghana cedis was purportedly in transit to the landlocked West African state, Niger, and they were seized following a joint operation by regulatory and intelligence agencies at the Tema port on March 14th this year. The shipment was seized following a coordinated inspection involving the Customs Division of the Ghana Revenue Authority, GRA, the NACOC, the National Security and National Intelligence Bureau, the FDA, and the Ghana Ports and Harbour Authority, GPHA. The story goes on to say the consignment included a large quantity of opioid pharmaceuticals laced with other drugs, raising concerns over illicit drug trafficking through Ghana's port. And like I said, this is linked to a Stop Red campaign. So one of these opioids I understand on the market, right, or in our communities is called Red. So there you can see on our screen right now some of these drugs that was seized being loaded into the incinerator for destruction, right? And I just want to add my voice to all the other voices that have spoken against the illegal use of these drugs. You know, Red will make you high or fine temporarily, but it has really lasting, you know, negative impacts for your body, your ability to be useful or to you know, do something very proper for yourself, right? So please, if you've by any chance come across this drug, you know, stay away from it and send the word out there that it's not a good thing to use. It won't help you in any way, really, right? And try help people. If you've come across anybody who's consumed this, you know, try send the message that, you know, Red is not the way, really, right? And Red means stop. Let's not, you know, find ourselves, or let's not indulge in the use of some of these illegal drugs. Also because it's illegal to use, right? And if you are caught, you know, in possession of some of these things, the law could take its course and it will not be pleasant for you at all. So shout outs to the Youth Development Ministry, headed by Yao Opare, you know, Pablo, they call him, you know, Aparado, I believe. They call him Pablo, former national, or still the national youth organizer for the NDC, you know, spearheading this really important campaign on the need to stop the illegal use, you know, of these opioids on our streets. And of course, we also want to urge the police and law enforcement to also, you know, be swift really in making sure that some of these things do not find their itself in the hands of unauthorized persons. But moving on to some other story, maybe this will be the last one. I also bring you some headlines on Ghana Weekend, and we move on from there. I'm still waiting for your messages on, you know, anything that you've heard so far that excites you. You have a comment on any of the story that I've read so far, you can do so via WhatsApp and Telegram line for Sunday Breakfast, Breakfast Daily Weekend, I beg your pardon. Of course, you can also use the hashtag Breakfast Daily Weekend on social media. I'll be glad to read all of your messages across for you. But finally, still here, and let me just tell you who our new acting government statistician is very briefly, and we can move on to some other things. So the president has appointed Dr. Al-Hassan Idrisu as acting government statistician, and he was appointed pending consultations with the Council of States. The Minister for Government Communications, Felix Kwachiofosu, made this known In a statement issued on Friday, April 4, 2025, Dr. Idrisu, a seasoned economist, currently serves as the Director of Economic Strategy and Research at the Ministry of Finance. In his role, he oversees national economic analysis, forecasting, policy research, and coordination of real and external sector assessments. His contributions include the preparation of the Ghana Macroeconomic Outlook Report and the shaping of the national budget and economic policy. So we wish Dr. Alhassan Idrisu well, right? But I'll say, he has big shoes to fill, right? We witnessed the work Dr. Enim, in the past couple of years, did with regards to the statistical service, making the data available for media houses, speaking to the media when he had to, explain the issues. He made numbers, according to a colleague of mine, sexy. And, it speaks to the enormous work his predecessor did. And hopefully he's able to fill these very big shoes. Interestingly, like I was saying earlier on, I was at a program yesterday by Shrash, right? And the statistical service. And on the National Action Plan on Corruption, they call it NACAP. And, I was listening to the government statistician go through the numbers, go through the research work they had done on corruption, right? And you could clearly tell that he had a passion for the job. So we wish our new government statistician well, Dr. Alhassan Idrisu. Hopefully we hear from him in the coming days on what his priorities are going to be, his vision for the sector, and how he can make sense of the numbers to address very important, or use that to help government address very important issues that affect us directly, right? With regards to the economy, with regards to healthcare, infrastructure, and all of those other things very important to us. Finally, GhanaWeekend.com. So GhanaWeekend.com basically is the go-to, place for all your entertainment-related, news stories. If it's big, if it's worth knowing, it will definitely be on GhanaWeekend.com, right? So make sure you make it a part, right, of your news consumption. It's very important. MP's 50,000 monthly salary wage woefully inadequate. And guess who is coming from? Kwame A+, right? And he's member of parliament for Gomwa East, I believe. Yeah, he's member of parliament for, I want to get a constituency right. All right, cool. So Gomwa Central, I beg your pardon, not Gomwa East, Gomwa Central. Kwame A+, a very known person in the space. He's been talking a lot. Some other stories, I don't wish it on you. Genevieve Inaji knocks trolls age shaming. Wow. Why you want to even age shame somebody like Genevieve? She's been looking, let me not bring my personal biases here, but she's been looking very, very good for whatever age she might have been. So she's been calling out trolls on social media who've been age shaming her. Also here, Ahwofe Patri, famous from her Calibus skit days, opens up on sexual demands in her acting career. And some other story. MTN Ghana confirms removal of 1% e-levy on Momo transactions. Charlie, so right now, they can't use it as an excuse again. Yeah. If the person who say the Momo, they'll send it. They can't say, oh, because of the charge, bring your bank. No, Charlie. If the person says, bring your bank, it means that he doesn't want to send the money to you. Right? So, shout outs to government for the removal, 1% removal on the e-levy transactions. And on that note, we bring the news review segment to an end.